The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you so much for joining us here on CPA Academy. This is Matt Isco, CPA Academy. My pleasure to welcome you to this presentation. We're ready to get started. Right here on time, we have a lot of attendees joining us for today's webinar. We're excited to get going, and before we do, just want to make sure everything is working. You should be able to hear me at this point. You should be able to see that very first slide up on your screen and already seeing several comments coming in saying hello, welcome, you can hear me. You can see the slide, you're letting me know where you're from. So I think we are in good shape. If there are any connection issues or technical issues during the session, please bear with us. Of course, we'll be working as hard as possible to restore those, make sure that we have a smooth course for you today, but not anticipating anything of that nature. If you do have questions for us, go ahead and utilize that questions panel during the session today. We'll do our best to keep an eye on those during today's course. Anything we don't get to, make sure that gets passed along once we wrap up with the course. Quick reminder on how things work. You can earn credit for today's session. It's simple to do so. Just remain logged in throughout the duration of the presentation. We're polling questions like we typically do. We're going to launch those polls intermittently throughout the session. You'll see them up on the screen where you're currently seeing the slide, and all you have to do, select an answer you feel is appropriate, then click on the submit button, and that will help record your attendance. Once we wrap up here, we'll get to work on issuing that credit to you. It takes us about 24 hours or less to do just that. You'll see an email, which will come from us here at CPA Academy, letting you know that it is all set and available in your CPA Academy account. We are recording today's session, so if you miss anything and need to review it, you certainly can do so. You find that in our archive library. We made a copy of the handouts available to you. They're right there in that tab, appropriately named handouts. So if you'd like to access those as a resource, I encourage you to do that. They'll also remain available in your CPA Academy account. Do want to take a moment to thank Gusto for this session. As always, they've been great sponsors of us here at CPA Academy, as well as providing a lot of exceptional content to our members, and looking forward to this topic here today. So Topher and Joey, thank you both for being here, putting together this session for us. Obviously an important topic, judging by how many people are here and joining. So looking forward to today's course, and we'll turn it over to you guys to get started. And Topher, just going to make sure your screen is working. I'm seeing it, but we'll try and reset that. But I think we're in good shape and ready to get started.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. We're going to dive into some updated topics. We're kind of updating by the hour right now with everything that's going on at a national level. And so we're seeing a lot of changes as a result of COVID-19, and impact on small businesses is definitely being felt. So today we're going to cover a few different topics, but I think, hey, Joey, I'm not seeing my stuff update just yet. I just moved to the next slide, but not seeing it go on your side.
Yeah, I see the same thing.
Sorry about that, Matt. Looks like it got kicked off.
Topher, so I may have reset that and maybe asking you to reshare.
Okay, I think we got it now. How's that?
Okay, yeah, I think if you just hit the present button, that will get us where we need to be.
Okay, perfect. Sorry guys, we're back on track now. So we're going to cover four main topics today. We're going to talk about, what can we expect now that these COVID-19 updates are starting to roll out from the federal level. We're also going to talk about how this is impacting small businesses very quickly, but we're going to put the majority of our focus on how do these two major acts that have passed in the last couple of weeks, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, as well as the CARES Act, impact small businesses. And then we'll talk about health insurance during that time to make sure that we have some good understanding of how this is going to impact group health insurance as well. So in terms of what we can expect is going to happen for small businesses, I want to sort of set the stage with a little bit of data as for what's happened already. So we're seeing a huge impact in terms of small business closures, which should be no surprise. We've heard a lot of information about this, probably seen it on news, and could be assumed given the stay in place orders and different orders that we're seeing in cities. So want you to sort of get a sense of some of the bigger cities, the percentage of drop in closures that we're seeing compared to the same weekdays in January. And so huge drops, 50% of those small businesses or more are seeing closures as of 3/27. So just a little bit further context to give you an idea of how it's impacting the employees as well as the small businesses themselves. We're seeing numbers beyond under 50% or negative 50% for small business employees who are going to work hourly employees. Now, what's interesting is we're seeing a bit of a plateau on this. It's just kind of maxed out the number of folks who may not be going in because they're brick and mortar type of SMBs, hourly workers. But if you look back at that previous slide as well, you're starting to see a bit of a plateau there. So this might be the limit or the extent of the impact, but of course that'll continue as long as those stay in place orders are in place. So I want to also talk a little bit about, building off of how COVID-19 specifically is impacting small businesses. Here's sort of a reminder of how recessions have impacted small businesses. The last one, major one being our 2008, 2009 Great Recession. So depending on where small businesses are located, we see more impact. So obviously the coasts, the more populated areas had bigger impact in terms of net job loss. So to break that down in comparison to some of the larger businesses, net job losses in 2008 to 2009, 62% of them were accounted for in small businesses, those sub 250 employers. So big impact to small businesses. This is a huge hit, and if these trends continue as a result of the closures that we're seeing from COVID, we're going to have some really big impacts on small businesses. So we're going to talk about how we can help those small businesses, because the government is also very concerned and trying to put together as much resources as possible. We've seen that with these last two acts that we talked about. So we're going to dive into those a little bit further. But before we do, let's go ahead and hop into our first polling question. So what trend have we seen for small business closures since mid-March? So that's really when all of this started. What sort of trend have we seen? Are closures about the same as were experienced last year? Are there fewer closures today compared to last year? Or are there more closures? And then last option, we still don't know. So while you're answering those questions, I'll lay a little bit more of the scene for our legislation that we're going to discuss. There have really been three major bills passed from the federal side. The first one was more focused on healthcare industry, providing support for health, but also was the first time that we started seeing expansion of SBA loan opportunities. The second bill that passed, the Families First, we'll talk about its focus being a little bit different. And then last, the most recent, the CARES Act, which impacted loans and tax credits tremendously for small businesses. Now, there's lots of other things going on from the state level. So we're not going to focus too much on the state level today because it's so different and moving in different ways across states, depending on how bad the impact has been. But there are additional credits and loans and things like that that are being made available depending on the state. All right, so let's continue on. So we're going to start by focusing on that second act that I mentioned, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, because like I said, those last two federal acts are the ones that have really impacted small businesses more than anything else. So the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act focuses on a couple of different things. The first being there's new paid FMLA leave that has been added only for the duration of this COVID-19 epidemic, though. And it's very specific just to COVID-19. So you don't have to worry about adding this FMLA leave for the entirety or for the future. It's really just specific to COVID-19. But it does apply to all small businesses. So if they have less than 500 employees is the definition that they're using for this new paid FMLA leave. It also applies to self-employed individuals, so they're eligible as long as they would be eligible if they were working for another employer. So if they would be eligible had they been employed by another employer, they too can benefit from the new paid FMLA leave. So in order to be eligible, an employee or that self-employed individual would have to be unable to work or telework. So they expanded the definition from the original text, and it includes telework. So if they can do neither of those things, because the employee has to care for a son or daughter, and the reason they have to care for them is because that son or daughter's school or care provider is closed as a result of COVID-19 related circumstances. So if the school has to close because there's a quarantine in place or a stay-in-place order, that would trigger this specific FMLA leave type. So this one, just like any other family leave, is specific to taking care of your family, son or daughter, and the care provider definition would be limited only to those care providers that are compensated, and this is their regular business. So in terms of after, eligibility, the amount that an employer would have to pay for these employees, the first 10 days go unpaid. And then after that, there's a $200 per day max. And so it's basically dependent upon the compensation that the individual would receive normally, but there's a $200 per day maximum, and there's a $2,000 aggregate maximum. So this benefit can only be paid up to the max of $10,000 in total. However, there's a tax credit. So even though the employer has a responsibility to pay for this leave while the employee is out, the tax credit allows the employer to receive, in the amount that they paid to any of the employees for this type of leave, they get a tax credit through their regular Social Security taxes each quarter. So that's their payroll taxes. And this can be automatically used in anticipation of who's getting paid for that quarter. So instead of having to put that money into the account for payroll taxes, instead they could hold on to that in anticipation of needing to pay and getting that tax credit. So it's almost like a real-time tax credit that they get, and no penalty will be applied to them for not having put those amounts into their payroll taxes. Any excess beyond the quarterly amounts allowed, so obviously you can't get a tax credit beyond what Social Security taxes for the employer would have been collected. And so that excess can then be credited through the business's taxes. And that's actually the only way that this credit is experienced by our self-employed individuals. So that's the first type of leave that is added as a result of the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act. The second type is an emergency paid sick leave. So this one applies to all employers. This one's not specific to the sub 500 folks, but again, it includes self-employed individuals who would be eligible if they were employed by an employer. So eligibility for individuals, again, is if they're unable to work or telework, but the requirement is expanded. So the first category that would qualify an individual is if that employee is quarantined by the government, if they're recommended to self-isolate by a healthcare professional, or they're experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and actively seeking care. So that's the first category of circumstances that can make an employee eligible. The second category is similar to the FMLA leave. It's when an employee is caring for someone else. If someone else that they need to care for is experiencing those symptoms that are in the previous condition, number one, then they could be eligible for this emergency paid sick leave. Also, if they're caring for a son or daughter, as mentioned in the FMLA, as a result of school or care provider closure. And this one's immediate. So while the FMLA, you could go 10 days without getting paid, the employer's not required to pay them for the first 10 days. This emergency paid sick leave is sort of the gap measure that covers those 10 days. So the employer has to pay it. And if they're eligible for category 1, then the maximum that they're eligible for is $511 per day with a $5,110 aggregate max. So you see that 10x aggregate max is meant to cover those 10 days before that FMLA kicks in. Of course, that would be if it applies to number 2, which category 2 is only $200 per day max with a $2,000 aggregate max. And so that matches up exactly to what the FMLA required payment is. And then the tax credit works the same way. So in anticipation of the costs associated with supporting this emergency paid sick leave, the employer gets tax credits for the employer responsibility for paying Social Security taxes.
Yeah.
So that's our, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, Joey Brown here, Gusto Benefits Advising, still working out some of the kinks of not talking over you as we all work remote. But just on the two types of leave, we're hearing a lot on the phones with clients and partners about the timing of some of it. Is it retroactive to January 1st? Is it starting today? Is it starting April 3rd? Can you give us a little bit of context on what timelines look like for the employee to take the leave or for some of the credits to start to come in?
Yeah, so the credits can start in this quarter already. This act was passed on the 15th, I want to say, signed by the president. And the act was basically the day that the act went into place, these requirements were also put into place. But they gave sort of this window until April 1st, or excuse me, April 2nd, I believe, for these requirements to kick in, but an employer could do it since the day that it was enacted and be eligible for the tax credit. So can do it as of the day of enactment, must do it by this month.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so our second polling question then. True or false, our Families First Coronavirus Response Act created a new type of FMLA leave for those who need to care for children due to school closure. So if someone's school gets closed, a son or daughter of an employee, is there a new FMLA leave that would require an employer to still pay that employee while they're out taking care of their children? And while we're finishing that one up, I'll just lay a bit of the foundation for our next section. The CARES Act moved very quickly. There's over $1 trillion of support that's going to industries and small businesses. And we're going to talk about some of the specific programs that were created as a result of the CARES Act and talk about how that money that was allocated, over $350 billion, I believe, was allocated towards small businesses specifically. So we're going to talk about how do we make sure that those small businesses get access to it and what programs exist and some of the terms around them to make sure that small businesses can get access to it. So just a second longer to finish out those polls. Great. Okay, so how does the CARES Act impact small businesses? So the first major program that was created by the CARES Act is our new Paycheck Protection Program. This one's huge, it's incredible. Here's why. It applies to SBCs, which is a new definition, small business concerns. It's basically a term for employers who have less than 500 employees, but it now includes sole proprietors, independent contractors, and other self-employed individuals. But the small business concern, those with less than 500 employees, as well as the self-employed types above, have to be experiencing supply chain disruptions, staffing challenges, and/or a decrease in gross receipts or customers or closure because of COVID-19. Now, as you can imagine, this is a pretty broad definition for those who are being impacted in this way, and it's meant to be broad that way. So I would venture a guess that the vast majority of small businesses are going to be experiencing one of these things at least. So, you know, it's supposed to be pretty liberal in terms of who gets access to the new Paycheck Protection Program. So now in terms of eligibility though, this new loan starts April 1st, which we'll talk about in just a minute with some caveats, or excuse me, April 3rd with some caveats, and is available until the end of June, so 6/30/20. The loan amount that they're eligible for is the average monthly payroll, and we'll talk about some of the things that go into that calculation. The average monthly payroll from the last 12 months before the loan's approved, although, like I said, hourly we're getting updates on this, and it looks like instead of the 12 months prior to the loan being approved, they might be using all of 2019 payroll instead, so the monthly average from that. So stay tuned as some of those regulations come out and guidance from the SBA. It's going to be one of those two, it sounds like, either 2019 average monthly payroll or the 12 months preceding the approval of the loan. So you're going to take that amount and then multiply it by 2.5, and that's the maximum that an employer is eligible for in terms of this loan. So technically it's a loan under the SBA, but we're going to talk about how, you know, this kind of functions more as a grant, but yes, technically it's a loan. And here's why. Funds can be used for any of these purposes. So payroll costs, mortgage, interest only for an employer's business, rent for a business. So if they had a lease in place, they could use it for that as well, and utilities. So any of these costs are eligible uses for those loans. But here's why it sort of feels more like a grant than it does a loan, because there's massive loan forgiveness for small businesses here. And so as long as the proceeds from that loan are used for those above approved purposes, the full amount of the loan can be forgiven. There are some conditions on this. One condition is that non-payroll costs, so that mortgage, rent, utilities, those can only account for a maximum of 25% of the loan. So payroll costs have to account for at least 75% of what this loan is used for. And then there's also a condition for headcount and payroll. So if your small business cuts headcount by more than 25% or reduces pay by more than 25% for any of their full-time individuals, that forgiveness will get reduced. We're still going through some of the specifics of how that's calculated. There is specific guidance in the legislation, but we're waiting to see exactly how that's going to be implemented because we haven't seen the regulations and how the SBA is going to implement that. But that's the basic pretext is you can't reduce headcount by more than 25% or payroll by more than 25% without it impacting your loan forgiveness. You also have until 6/30/20 to correct that. So let's say your small business goes and gets the loan, but they were worried before they got those funds and they had to terminate, 30–40% of their staff. If they go back and are able to get that 30 to 40% to come back, or at least to that 25% maximum, then they can still be eligible for the full amount of forgiveness. So they have a period of time to correct that payroll or headcount reduction. And then those loan proceeds, though, have to be used for those purposes, the approved purposes above, within 8 weeks following the disbursement of funds. So they have 8 weeks from the time they get the loan to figure out how much is going to go towards mortgage, payroll, rent, utilities, and make sure that they're meeting those requirements above for their full loan forgiveness. Lenders cannot charge any fees for them to have access to these loans. So like I said, it's pretty incredible. No cost to the employer as long as they use it within the time frame and meet these requirements. They can help out their small business employees, try to hold on, retain them while we ride out this obviously a pandemic, a big issue for small businesses as well as the world. But as long as they can get access to it, which they should have access from many different types of lenders, we'll talk about that just a second, they'll be able to have complete loan forgiveness. So the timing on this is that small businesses and sole proprietors will be able to apply for this new SBA loan as soon as April 3rd. So just a couple of days here. However, independent contractors and self-employed individuals won't be able to start applying until April 10th. So you can advise your clients, those independent contractors, self-employed folks, sit tight. It's going to be happening in just over a week. So where can they get these loans? As I was saying before, they can get it from any existing SBA lender. All existing SBA lenders can do these loans. And it's being expanded to federally insured banks, credit unions, and there's likely going to be fintech companies and other lenders that are going to be approved specifically for this program and only for the time frame that the COVID-19 public health emergency is in place. So as soon as that gets lifted, those non-SBA lenders, non-banks, non-credit unions, they'll lose their ability to do these loans. And those loans will also be terminated after 6/30. So my suggestion is have your small businesses check with their regular lenders, find out if that's available to them, but also think about the requirements for doing this. So since you need so much payroll information, you can also consider reaching out to payroll providers because they may be getting approval to help out and facilitate these loans, or at the very least, provide quick ways to get to that data. So that's where they're allowed to get it. I want to dive a little bit deeper on what payroll costs mean. So on that last slide, payroll costs was one of the main purposes of it, 75% for those uses. So payroll costs include salary, wages, commissions, and tips. So it's inclusive of all four of those. However, there's a cap. If you annualize an individual employee's salary, wages, commissions, and tips, it has to be at a max of 100K of that annualized amount. So that 2.5x and the amount that's forgiven is capped at 100K annualized per employee. Then on top of that, payroll costs include employee benefits like paid leave, separation and dismissal pay, as well as retirement benefits. Now you can't use, if you get the FMLA tax credit or the paid sick leave tax credit from the Families First Act that we already discussed, if you take those, then you don't get to stack that. No double dipping, no double benefit here. You can't take the loan amount and forgiveness amount for those anticipated tax credits. But this is still huge. You can include the payroll costs that your employee would pay towards premiums for group health insurance, things like that. So we'll dive deeper in that with Joey in a few minutes, but just know those can be included in your payroll costs. Payments required for provision of group healthcare benefits. So the premiums that you're paying, that the employee's paying in order to keep those group healthcare benefits in place. You can also include the state and local taxes that are assessed on that compensation above. So those salary, wages, commissions, tips, you can include state and local taxes assessed on it. And then lastly, since we're also dealing with sole proprietors and independent contractors, they can only use salary, wages, commissions, income, or net earnings, basically. But again, it has that cap at 100K annualized. So those are the approved payroll costs that can be used for calculating the loan maximum that's available, as well as the loan forgiveness that's available.
Yeah. And
right, so that's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joey.
To step in, if you go back, it is one thing to be like a better partner on the phone with clients and with our partners. One thing we're doing a lot of right now is helping people navigate between which one is the better option, to be to take the SBA loan or to go the tax credit route, knowing that you can't stack them. I'm assuming those types of questions are going to ramp up in the coming weeks as this comes to fruition a little more. But that's one area I would recommend spending a little bit more time on. And I believe we'll share out these slides after the presentation and you can come back in and get a refresher. But do anticipate that being a pretty big focus in working with small business owners of, should we take the loan or should we look at the tax credits?
Yeah, that's right, Joey. So you're not able to take both of those, the Family First ones and this loan, but I am going to talk about some of the things that you can take in addition to this SBA loan. The next one being an economic injury disaster loan. And this is one that was created in the first bill and given a lot more definition in the CARES Act. So this type of bill, again, applies to small business concerns, but they add ESOPs and a couple of other structures. The ESOPs were the main one. Sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed folks, still eligible, but again, they have to be experiencing those supply chain disruptions, staffing challenges, decrease in gross receipts, or closure because of COVID-19. So again, specific to COVID-19, the SBA loan on this one, though, is available until 12/31/20. So if there's a state or area where they're really having impact from this economic injury as a result of COVID-19 in that state or that sub area within the state, they'll be eligible for this economic injury disaster loan, EIDL. So employers who are suffering those sufficient economic damages will be eligible up to a maximum of $200,000. But here's the interesting thing on this one. An employer who applies on the day of application, within 3 days, they can be given a $10,000 advance. So 3 days of application is sent in, $10,000 advance, up to $10,000 advance can be sent to them. But what's incredible on this one is that the advance is not subject to repayment if the application is denied. Even if it's denied, they have no responsibility to repay that 10K advance. Now, if they are approved, that 10K will be reduced from the amount that they're requesting. So if they request the max 200K, they'll only get an additional 190 if they took the 10K advance. So this is, if they're eligible, very quick way within 3 days of an application for an employer to get access to $10,000. And the CARES Act actually expanded the ability for an SBA lender to approve solely on a credit score. So the SBA can decide, just looking at the credit score based on their eligibility, not only can they get the 10K advance, but they can also get up to that additional $190,000 available to them. Now, this one is more like a loan, though, less like the grant that we saw in the Paycheck Protection. So there is still payments. There will be payments set up for them to continue to pay back this actual loan. The last thing, or I guess two last things that were added for small businesses, or maybe the biggest impact items for small businesses, are employee retention credits and a Social Security tax deferral. But in order to be eligible for these credits, you have to have not taken the loans. So not the Paycheck Protection loan or the EIDL loan. If you don't take those, then you're eligible for these employee retention credits or Social Security tax deferrals. So unlike being able to stack, get the family's first tax credits and then go get the Paycheck Protection loan, you can't do that with these ones. You have to choose either or. Now, on the employee retention credits, it basically lets an employer elect for each quarter until the end of 2020, they can get 50% up to 10K in qualified wages for each qualified employee. So each employee in that quarter, up to 10K, the employer can get 50% in retention credits. Now, those credits are limited, though, to the 6.2% employer's share of Social Security taxes. So their share of Social Security taxes, they can get up to 50% of those 10K wages credited. And then it follows the same pattern as the family's first credits, though, where they can apply this to their quarterly filings, but if they hit the maximum of what they're able to use in that quarter in terms of their employer share of Social Security taxes, again, that excess can be sent over to business taxes at the end of the year. And then the second piece that was added is a Social Security tax deferral. So the employers can, in addition to these credits, they can choose to defer up to 50% of their responsibility to pay the 6.2% Social Security taxes through the end of this year. So those employer Social Security taxes, they can say, not able to pay those, I'll pay 50% of it by the end of 2021, and then the second 50% by the end of 2022. So plenty of opportunity for a small business to either receive money directly from lenders or get real-time tax credits from their 6.2% employer share Social Security taxes. So pretty incredible. That's how that $350 billion in the CARES Act is supposed to flow out to the small businesses to try and support them. The EIDL loan, remember, and the Paycheck Protection Program can be used, both of them, 10K advance that is not required to be repaid even if their loan application is denied. And then that Paycheck Protection 2.5x payroll costs. I mean, this is just unprecedented, the amount of support that they're trying to provide for small businesses. And of course, all of this is with the goal in mind of preventing employers from having that same impact that we saw from the 2008-2009 recession. We're trying to help them and avoid those types of layoffs and at least provide some interim relief while this COVID-19 pandemic washes over. So let's hop into our third polling question. Which of the following is a new type of loan offered through the CARES Act? And again, I'll put loan kind of in quotations on this one. Yes, technically it's a loan, but I almost think of this a little bit more of a grant as a result of all the forgiveness. But which of the following is a new type of loan offered through the CARES Act? A, the Paycheck Protection Program, B, an express loan, or C, a jumbo loan. So remember, this loan is available through the SBA. An employer can go to any already approved SBA lender. So any lender they'd normally go to for an SBA loan. And you know, a lot of the criteria, I didn't mention, some of the criteria that normally applies to an SBA loan, things like they have to first go and find other sources of credit, and only if they can't find other sources of credit are they eligible for an SBA loan. That does not apply in this scenario for a Paycheck Protection Program loan or an EIDL loan. So it doesn't apply. You can seek that without some of those limitations that we've seen in the past for SBA loans. And of course, all of this only applies, though, for the duration of the public health emergency as declared by the president. Give just a second longer to complete the third polling question. Great. Okay, so moving to our next section, fourth and final, how can small businesses handle health insurance during this time? So health insurance, big concern. We want to make sure that small business employees continue to get access to care, especially when there's a health pandemic going on. So many folks are asking, hey, how does this impact my small businesses in terms of health insurance? And I just want to call out that Gusto does work with partners, accountants. We have partner programs. We are actively building out support for small businesses based on the new availability of loans and tax credits, things of that nature. So since payroll information is so important for determining how much they're eligible for and whether or not they get full forgiveness, I definitely recommend working closely with payroll partners. And of course, Gusto has a people platform serving over 100,000 small businesses, and we're actively building out the support to make sure that we can help small businesses with those new options. So how does this impact health insurance? Well, SBA loan proceeds and tax credits. So remember those Paycheck Protection Programs, EIDL loans, the tax credits, they can be used for expenses in terms of that principal loan amount. You can calculate the loan amount maximum as well as the forgiveness amounts, inclusive of those costs that are incurred or paid that are necessary to provide and maintain a group health plan. So think of this as long as they're doing pre-tax in Section 125 benefits for employees, the amounts that are allocated towards that, inclusive of premiums, can be used to calculate the max that they're eligible for and how much they can have forgiven. So one of the impacts to health insurance as a result of this, it provides relief to small businesses so that even if the employee cannot afford to continue giving their portion, their contribution towards health insurance, even if the employer is having negative impacts as a result of COVID-19 in their ability to pay for those health benefits, they can include those amounts paid or incurred that are necessary to provide and maintain that group health plan. They want to keep folks in small businesses on their small group plans. And so this is one way to help them do that. They can also use amounts for qualified sick leave wages and qualified family leave wages. So remember those sick leave and family leave that was added with the Families First Act? Those two can include qualified health plan expenses and the eligible employer's share of Medicare tax on those wages. So qualified health plan expenses also allowed to be counted on that paid leave and eligible for tax credit. Pretty huge. Want to make sure that folks have access to health. Here's a great way that you can help your small businesses understand, hey, I know that it's getting tough if it's not already, but you really should still be providing this to your employees. Here's how you can.
Got it. Yeah. And we included
Joey, I'm going to kick over to you. I think you had some comments you wanted to go into for qualified health plans.
Yeah, thanks, Topher. We wanted to include some slides on what a qualified health plan expense is.
There you go.
Topher, can you hear me? Are we good? All right. So in trying to digest this, right, the Families First Act talks a little bit about the tax credits, and it's really meant, from my understanding, to help a small business pay those wages to employees if they're taking time off due to COVID. The business not having that liability of actually having to come out of pocket for it and receiving those wages back in form of a tax credit is a pretty big impact to the small business owner, and hopefully will allow them to stay afloat. Then on the SBA loan side, it's a little bit more flexible in what you can actually use the funds for. When you talk about covering some of the utilities, covering some of the rent, you can do a little bit more with the Paycheck protection program outside of just the regular wages. Included in both the tax credits from the Family Act and the Paycheck Protection and the CARES Act is language to help the small business owner continue to provide and maintain the group health plan. Reading the IRS regulation, reading the CARES Act itself, it's a little tricky, as I'm sure a lot of people know if you've ever tried to do it. So digesting a little bit further, what exactly is a qualified health plan expense? For the following options, these are all included in receiving that tax credit or being able to use the loan. So most people think of insurance, they think of a fully insured group plan. You might also think of a self-insured group plan. These are pretty easy to calculate that credit or the amount that you could use the loan for. It's basically the full yearly premium for an employee divided by the number of working days in the year. And then for those days that the employee is actually taken off or out of the workforce, you get that credit or you can use the loan for that amount. So pretend you've got $13,000 in annual premiums. You divide that by 260 working days. It would be $50 for that employee that you would receive the tax credit, or you could use the loan amount. For HRAs and the new ICHRA for 2020, same thing. Anything that the employer pays towards the HRA, you can get the tax credit dollar for dollar, in addition to the wages, dollar for dollar. Same thing for contributions to the FSA on the employer side, tax credit available, SBA loan being able to be used to make that up. What's cool about the group health plans outside of the arrangements, the FSA or the HRA, is knowing that the premiums are still being due to the carrier. The employer for the first two can actually get the tax credit for the full premium amount. As you might know, the majority of employers cover a portion of the group health plan, usually 50% or more. But when you're actually claiming the tax credit, you would cover the entire premium not just what the employer is paying. You can also include in the tax credit what the employee is paying, knowing that it's ultimately the business who's making the payment to the carrier. And if you'll go to the next one. In terms of what they're not identifying as a qualified health plan, any contributions towards an employee's HSA, given the nature of that tax advantage account, those contributions are not included in the tax credits or the SBA loan. In order to have an HSA, you have to be enrolled in a high deductible health plan. So you could use the premiums that you pay towards the high deductible plan in the tax credits, but the actual HSA contribution is not considered an eligible expense. And then on the HRA side, if you have clients who are in QSARA, the Qualified Small Employer HRA, those contributions are also not counted for the tax credit or the loan. But I wanted to summarize it because it's a lot here. So Topher, if you'll go to the next one. We'll have a little quick and dirty here. On the left, we have everything that is eligible. Like I said, fully insured plans, self-insured plans, HRA, and the individual coverage HRA, FSA contributions. Not eligible, again, the HSA, the QSARA. And then if you have any clients with plans where the employees are paying after-tax dollars, post-tax dollars towards the premium, those contributions are not eligible in either program. So Topher mentioned Section 125 as the key. It's got to be anything pre-tax that the employer or the employee is paying into the health insurance. A couple other notes here, some miscellaneous items to call out in terms of the benefits. Yeah, Topher, you can go to the next one. On the health insurer side, the CARES Act included language to make sure that employees weren't paying for COVID testing and preventative care. So a lot of the carriers are actually covering those costs. Some carriers are waiving the deductible, but most carriers are just covering the cost. The other thing to note, 401k disbursements, you could take out up to $100,000 without that 10% early withdrawal penalty. And then educational expenses, there's some changes there, especially if you're working with clients who have younger workforce populations with student loans. You can get that credit to be paid actually directly to the lender, and it's pre-tax. Let's see. And Topher, if you go to the next one, I'm getting booted off Wi-Fi. Hope everyone can still hear me. Yeah, so in summary, the Family Cares Act, for the Family First Act, excuse me, talks a lot about the two new types of leave, the emergency paid sick leave and the new FMLA
no problem,
leave.
Joey.
So those two are generally to cover the wages for workers who are being sent home or quarantined. Then you have the CARES Act, which is a little bit more robust in terms of adding the Paycheck Protection Program, a lot more flexible in what you can use that money for to help keep your clients' doors open. And then we talked about the health insurance impacts. The tax credits in the Families Act includes what you would use to maintain or provide group health insurance. Same thing on the SBA loans, provide and maintain group health plans. Again, reference the slides previously for what may or may not be eligible as an expense. And one thing Topher mentioned earlier, and you can go to the next slide, Topher, is what we're doing at Gusto. Topher mentioned you should have a good payroll partner in your corner. I think he's a little bit biased given who his employer is. But we do have a robust partner program at Gusto.
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. The number you dialed has been changed, disconnected, or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check.
All right, sorry about that. But it's
Very
important.
strange, guys, but we'll continue on. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Matt.
I think we lost. Yeah, I think we lost Joey.
Yep, I'm here. So again, I think Topher's a little biased. I think he's also having some audio issues, but who can blame him? It's important to have a good partner on your side. We do believe that we are a good partner. If you need help supporting your small business clients, we would love to help. We would love to explain more about what the partner program is and what Gusto's doing to support this legislation to move money around. We're happy to have those conversations. We do have a final polling question here. Topher, if you go to the next slide, and Matt, if you can launch it for us. While you guys are taking this poll, I do want to shout out CPA Academy and Matt. You guys have been a tremendous help for us to put this on. There have been a couple hundred questions that have come through from the attendees. We'll do our best to get back to everyone unless we've covered it in the slides, but we'll probably shoot you a quick note to make sure there's no confusion. But yeah, happy to have everybody here. Thanks for listening. Topher, I'll give it back to you for any final comments.
Yeah, I think my last comment is we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but everything in those loans is really going to be focused on payroll data. You're gonna need to know your employers are gonna have to present tax documents in order to justify not only the loan amounts, but also the forgiveness amounts. So make sure that they're really clear on that. They're going to have to make certain certifications, asserting that they're not, applying for multiple loans since they only get one of those paycheck protection loans. They're going to have to assert that they've provided tax documents and that they understand those tax documents are going to be used to justify the maximum amount of loan available to them, as well as the forgiveness amount. So just want to make sure that we're also really clear the application process very separate from the forgiveness process. So they'll need to, after those 8 weeks, when they've spent that money, they're going to need to hold on to any receipts or proof that they made mortgage payments, utility payments, things like that. They should also know that utilities had to have been in service before the act in order to qualify. I think it might have even said February 20th. I don't remember off the top of my head, but just warn them that, if it's a brand new service in their utilities, which could be internet, it could be phone, it could be power, it could be water, any of those are eligible, but they needed to have already been in service. So I guess what I'm getting at is keep good records for your small businesses, or work with them to make sure you keep those records so that you can get the full forgiveness amount. That's obviously the goal, should be the goal for all of you and for all of your small businesses, is to get access to those funds quickly. That can happen immediately with the lender, like next day type of disbursement rather. So if they can get that information into the lender, all of the lenders are being designated as a delegated lender, which means that they can just approve it themselves as long as they've collected that application and the initial tax forms or tax documents and payrolls, things like that, to confirm the maximum amount. They can just disperse it. And so because this is supposed to move so quickly, though, it's important that everyone keeps the records of what's actually used to justify the maximum, as well as the forgiveness amounts. So I think that's probably the last thing I would say on there. Same thing's going to be used for the EIDL loans. Make sure that you're keeping good records, submitting that properly, submit properly the application in order to get that quick 10K turnaround. yeah, and as Joey said, happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much for attending, folks.
All right, Topher, thank you so much. And Joey, thank you as well. Another fantastic job, guys. And appreciate you being here. Not sure, Topher, if there's one final slide after this with contact information, but another case as we're wrapping up here. Just a reminder for everybody, we're going to get to work on issuing credit. You'll see an email from us here at CPA Academy letting you know when it's all set. Try and get that processed as soon as possible for you. You'll find that in your CPA Academy account. Handouts of today's session will also remain in your CPA Academy account. So if you didn't grab those yet and you'd like to, you're certainly encouraged to do that. We'll have a recording of today's session. So anything they may have missed, anything that's audio cut out or spotty or just want to review, you're certainly welcome to do so. We'll have that recording later in the day today in our archive library. I want to thank Gusto, sponsors of CPA Academy, helping bring content like this to our platform for quite a while. We're appreciative of them, and I certainly encourage you to be on the lookout for other courses that Gusto is bringing to our members. You can find that all on cpaacademy.org. So once again, Joey, Topher, thank you both so much, and looking forward to having you back with us very soon.
Thanks, Matt.